let's get started. Let's welcome our District 15 Senator Brian Feldman, delegates Linda Foley and David Fraser-Hidalgo. Unfortunately, Delegate Lily Chi cannot attend due to a family emergency, but Katie Hardy, her Chief of Staff, is going to ably fill in for her. Um, I'm not going to acknowledge the elected representatives who are in attendance because we can't see anybody. Um, we can only see the members of the panel, and so that's just the way it is with Zoom, I guess. Um, if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A, not in the chat, because we're going to be reading that for any questions after we get past the pre-submitted questions. I'm going to ask each legislator to introduce themselves with an brief opening statement. We're going to ask each one to inform us of their leadership positions and committee assignments so that those in the audience can be familiar with that, and to mention only their top two issues for this session, excluding the budget. The first question is going to have to do with the budget. I think that's the elephant in the room, and we're going to give some time to discuss that. Then we're going to move on to other questions. We're going to try to keep it moving and limit it to a couple of minutes for the answers and go on to the next question and see if we can cover a lot more in our relatively limited time. We're going to start. I'll ask the questions that were submitted beforehand, which I've rejiggered because we got a lot of duplicates, and I've kind of combined them into one question. Then we'll go through the chat. Then, if we have time, we'll open the floor to questions. We're looking for short, sweet, lively discussion. And we're going to ask you to limit your questions to one or two sentences. We're looking for questions. We'll cut you off if you start a dissertation. And then after that, each legislator will have the opportunity to present a closing statement. So let's start with Senator Brian Feldman.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you to the District 15 caucus for inviting us again to a pre-session overview by the delegation. Let me, before I talk about everything but the budget, you said I should focus on everything not related to the big issue. I do want to just say that about the team as a whole, I think it's important after we've gelled together, this group has been together now two full sessions. And the Senate committee I chair, which is the Education, Energy, and Environment Committee in the State Senate, overlaps with both Delegate Foley's Committee, Environment and Transportation on environmental issues, and then Delegates Chi and Fraser-Hidalgo on energy policy and a lot of other things. So it's really, again, as a team, we've gelled on a lot of fronts. We're going to collaborate on a bunch of bills this session. And I'll just brag about the team in the sense that we have brought home yet again last year, 2024, record amounts of capital money back to District 15. And even though the pie is going to be a little more limited this session, I expect that of the entire state of Maryland will be at the very top of the food chain as far as bringing back dollars back to District 15. As I said earlier, I chair one of the four standing committees in the state Senate, the, again, Education, Energy, Environment Committee, which has the broadest jurisdiction literally of any committee in the General Assembly, which had more bills during the 2024 session than any other committee in the General Assembly. Just to reel off, the jurisdiction includes not just education policy, which is K through 12 and higher ed, energy policy, environment, but it also hits things like AI, cybersecurity, affordable housing, election law, things involving data centers. And so again, that's going to be my focus. Again, I chair the committee. Another senator from Montgomery County, Cheryl Kagan from District 17 is my vice chair. And so we make a good duo. So on the on the education front, one of the big issues has been, many of you follow, the blueprint for Maryland. And so we made a massive decision to make a massive investment over the next 10 years in K through 12 education. We're basically in year 3 on that front, but there's going to be a lot of action on that because when you get past fiscal year 26, which is the fiscal year we'll be addressing this coming session, the blueprint is funded through this fiscal year, but after that, in the out years, it is going to be a big contributor to the structural budget deficit that we're facing between now and 2030. And so there is going to be bills in to modify some timelines. We have an issue in K through 12. We have a huge educator shortage in the state of Maryland, something like 15,000. And we have a lot of teachers. I've got the numbers. I mean, believe it or not, we have 6,000 teachers right now operating under provisional certifications, not fully trained or licensed. And so we've made a commitment to go forward, but we're going to have to make some modifications because of the reality on the budget front. So you're going to see some things there. That's it. Okay. Well, I mean, I, I don't know what to say other than education, energy policy, which is going to be the second biggest issue in the General Assembly this session after the budget, which comes entirely within my committee. Affordable housing comes within the committee. And again, we're going to be extremely busy in the committee. And I had a lot more to say with my opening statement, but Lisa, I don't know, did you shut me off after 2 minutes? I mean, that's not really, we're going to have somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 bills. So in 2 minutes, that's a tall order, but I'll stop there since I did get the red card from Lisa Edwards. So.
David Fraser-Hidalgo, you're up.
Yeah, so thank you, everybody. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for everybody for putting this on again this year. I know we always do the opening and we do the closing. So this is our opening, and then we'll have one after session. So I serve on the Economic Matters Committee. That's the same committee that Delegate Chi serves on. And I chair the Property and Casualty Subcommittee. So the things that I specifically deal with on that committee are things like insurance, property insurance, casualty insurance, homeowners, car insurance, MAIF. So there'll probably be a bill or two in dealing with that, affordability and how MAIF works, how MAIF runs. And then I have a few energy bills that I always have a few energy bills, and this year is no different. The Renew Act, which essentially will instruct the state to go after the big fossil fuel industries, the biggest polluters, and have them pay the state back. I think that this year there's a very good chance of passing this bill. Couple of practice runs over the last couple of years, but with a $2.7 billion budget shortfall, which we're going to talk about in detail, I think that there's this idea that 2.7 billion, and this would generate about $1 billion a year, specifically for environmental related, climate change related issues and mitigation. So, and then there's another couple bills. I know that I have a bill in with Senator Feldman. The bill will be in my committee. The bill will be in his committee. It's a economic development bill when it comes to small startups, and helps to get those small startups and gives them the ability to kind of trade some kind of credits moving forward so that they can take full advantage of tax incentives. Those are the big pieces. I think that we'll talk a lot, and with Senator Feldman, when it comes to data centers moving forward. Data centers is going to be a really, really big topic of conversation. Energy capacity markets is going to be a very big piece of conversation as well. So the big three things I would say coming to my committee that we're going to have to deal with, not all of it coming to my committee, but the budget is going to be huge, and how we deal with that, which we'll talk more about. Energy is going to be huge, how we generate, distribute energy, and how we get to those climate goals. And lastly, data centers are going to be huge. Those are the big things that I think are going to be coming to the committee. And I am done. I think you're up, Linda. I got the red card.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the District 15 Caucus for hosting this. And thank you, Larry, for moderating this. So I'm the newbie in the team. I do want to correct one thing that Senator Feldman said. This is actually our third session. We've already had 3 sessions together. This is our 4th. So we are.
Oh.
Yeah, so we are. I know that because I know when I came on board. We are gelling, and we are a great team, and it's great to be a part of this team. I serve on the Environment and Transportation Committee. I serve on the Agriculture and Natural Resources Subcommittee. and on the Environment Subcommittee on that committee. I think the other thing worth mentioning, two other things. One, I'm also chair this session of the Economic Development Committee for the Montgomery County delegation, and I am treasurer of the Women's Caucus. So this is going to be a busy session for me, more than it has been. Dave and Brian touched on, the big issues we're going to be dealing with. I would say one thing in the E&T committee, in addition to affordable housing, we are going to be dealing with building energy standards. I believe that's going to be a prime topic for us in that committee. As far as my list, I have 10 bills that I'm actually working on. Two of them are very constituent specific. One is I'm working with Senator Feldman on a short-term rentals and short-term amenities regulation bill. This comes out of that sex party that was held in Potomac. That was just a crazy party, and everybody was concerned about it. And this would put some parameters around the use of short-term rentals and safety requirements, as well as some tax reporting and other reporting issues. I also have a privacy bill for homeowners associations. This came out of an issue in Clarksburg where the Clarksburg homeowners association was asking for birth certificates on children before they could attend the pool. Yeah, I know. So I have put in a bill to kind of limit the kind of sensitive information that common ownership communities can request. I have pre-filed the special elections bill again to fill legislative vacancies in the General Assembly. Senator Kagan is the cross-filer on that. And that will come before Brian's committee. I have a couple of bills around traffic and Vision Zero enforcement. And then I have two collective bargaining bills for the University of Maryland, as well as I am doing some work around shoring up local media and doing some things to help bolster our local media ecosystem. And I think that does it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Katie Hardy, you're going to ably fill in for Lily.
I will do my best. Yes. So my name is Katie Hardy. I'm the Chief of Staff for Delegate Lily Chi. Delegate Chi sits on the Economic Matters Committee with Delegate Fraser-Hidalgo, and she chairs the Business Regulation Subcommittee within Economic Matters, as well as the co-chairs the Joint Committee on Federal Relations. This year, this year, the delegate is really doubling down on growing the economy and introducing bills to help grow our economy. Because with this budget deficit that we're facing, we need to focus on really long-term growth. So in order to do this, the delegates reintroducing a bill that would expand the powers of industrial development authorities to help our counties revitalize underserved areas, attract businesses, and promote economic development. In that same theme, she will also be introducing legislation to lift the barrier for businesses with under 50 employees and to provide health insurance through professional employer organizations, as well as introduce legislation to make limited worker cooperative associations a recognized business category by the states. Another tying into that economic development is introducing a local bill, that she's worked with the District 15 team in order to better understand the tourism economy in our agricultural reserve and Western Montgomery County to see what we can do to help grow and promote that area. That being said, I think the other delegates and senator kind of touched on some of the bigger themes. Another big theme that we'll probably be seeing this session is also energy and the environment, as mentioned, as well as some AI regulations and some comprehensive AI legislation. So I know it's a lot. We have 15 bills this year, so hopefully we have 15 bills this year, so hopefully we can work around the budget to see what we can do. And I see my end sign. Thank you.
And I thank you. We're trying to keep it moving this time. Hopefully it'll work out. One question for you, Andrew. I see some in the chat, some of the people that are here. Can anybody see that, or should I recognize them?
Don't worry about that. I've posted that so everybody can see.
Okay, thank you. as I said, and as you have all said, the elephant in the room this year is the budget deficit. We have a number of questions on there. What should the legislature do to address the revenue gap, including how the legislature will handle budget reallocations proposed by the governor? We also have a number of questions on, hey, is there going to be a tax increase this year? And, are there revenue raising issues as well as what's going to happen? So Brian is the sole senator in this room, and maybe you would like to start on that one.
Sure.
And Lisa, we're going to give people, I don't know, pick a number, 5 minutes.
Okay, well, yeah, so
That's great.
I think without question, the biggest issue, although again, as I say, we have a lot of other issues, but the budget situation by our budget analyst 2 weeks ago said that we're in the toughest situation we've been in 20 years. And it's, there's a lot of factors. It's about federal money that dried up. It's about maybe spending, not identifying funding sources for things like the blueprint, a whole bunch of things. But the biggest contributors right now are actually Medicaid funding, and that has gone way, way up. And child care subsidies that we provide for child care. And those numbers have gone up in a major way as a result of some eligibility changes and the like. And so those are the biggest drivers. The blueprint, as I mentioned earlier, is actually fully funded through fiscal year 26, but then it's going to be a big burden on our structural budget deficit. So right now we're looking at close to a $3 billion budget deficit. The only thing I mentioned, we have 2,500 or 3,000 bills that come in. The only thing that we're actually required by the Constitution to do is to leave Annapolis on sine die having passed a balanced budget. Everything else is discretionary. So that is number one. And we also have a AAA bond rating that we have to be mindful of. We're one of 13 states that have a coveted AAA bond rating. So whatever we do this year, we want to make sure we keep that AAA bond rating. It keeps our borrowing costs down. But we also want to grow our economy. I think Katie mentioned one of the ways out of here is to grow Maryland's economy, which frankly has not been operating on all cylinders. And so whatever we do when it comes to tax policy or spending cuts, we don't want to do anything that undercuts our ability to grow the economy. So let me just make a couple of quick points. First, to the point about the growth of our economy, Brooke Learman, our state comptroller, released a report at the end of last year which pointed out that since 2016 to now, our GDP in the state of Maryland has been basically, we've only grown about 1.6%. The national number is 13.9% over that period of time. Virginia, 11%. Pennsylvania, 6%. So we have this is her language, a stagnant in terms of private sector job creation, and that is a huge issue. So we've really got to. The governor just recently issued an executive order to talk about cutting down on red tape in certain specific sectors like the life sciences and the like. These are some areas we have inherent strength. We have NIH, we have FDA consolidated headquarters. We have a lot of assets here, but we haven't capitalized them on it that much. But that's one of the complicating factors to solve the budget deficit. We've got to come up with some better strategies to grow the economy and the tax base. The other thing is the new federal administration, as you all know, are coming in talking, number one, about reducing the federal workforce, possibly relocating federal agencies to other parts of the nation, not bringing FBI headquarters to Prince George's, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we have a huge number of federal contractors in the state, something like $48 billion. We have 150 to 160,000 federal workers in the state of Maryland. So if, in fact, the new administration does what it claims it wants to do, there's no region or perhaps no state in the nation that will be more impacted than the state of Maryland. So these are complicating factors to solve the problem. So I think I think everybody has said that everything's on the table. We're going to have to do some cuts. We're going to have to do some revenues. We could talk about some of the specifics, but the number is a big one. We have a rainy day fund of about $2.5 billion. We have to tap some of that to kind of help help us out, but we're going to have to do some things on the revenue side, and then we're going to have to make some cuts. And so, just to be clear, the governor has the first crack at this. So on January 15th, which is next week, the governor will introduce the budget, and that'll sort of lay the framework. And at least we'll know what the governor, and he's going to introduce a balanced budget. So that sort of starts the process. And then the House of Delegates takes that and makes some modifications, then sends it to the Senate. And so this is going to be a long process, but starts with the governor next week, next Wednesday. And we'll see what he puts on the table, and that'll again frame the debate moving forward. But I'm sure there'll be some questions on the particulars. But with that, Larry, I'll yield back to you.
So David or Linda, do you want to comment from the House side of the equation?
No, I mean, I think that Senator Feldman hit the big pieces.
Okay.
This is going to be a combination
Yeah.
of some cuts, and it's going to be a combination of some raising of taxes. I mean, I don't know how to say it. I think people need to brace about what happens or doesn't happen with Kerwin. I mean, the blueprint. So I think Brian hit all the. I don't really have anything to add.
What I heard from Brian is that we really won't know any specifics until the governor proposes his budget. Is that kind of an accurate understanding of how the process works?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not going to. I mean, I think Senator Feldman, like I said, he broad stroked everything. It's going to be some version, some formula of what Senator Feldman just said, and what exactly that looks like, and exactly where the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. That's going to be the making of the meatballs, as they say.
Right. And
Okay, I don't want to cut you off. If you have anything to add, feel free to jump in. Linda, did you start to say something?
I was just gonna say, I was just gonna add, as the senator and Delegate Fraser-Hidalgo said, everything is on the table. We are a little bit, waiting on the governor, but I would also say that I think we do need to be clear-eyed that this is not a budget crisis that we can cut our way out of. It's going to require both sides of the equation. It's going to require cutting, and it's going to require producing some additional revenues. We just need to be clear-eyed about that.
Yep.
Okay, so the next question.
Larry,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I should have mentioned one other thing. When we talk about a $3 billion deficit, that does not include the crisis we have in our transportation trust fund. That is not general fund money. We have a big problem there because of a lot of things. More folks driving EVs, not paying in gas tax. That's how we fund transportation in the state. And so that's another crisis for our state. And in order to kind of, so we can talk a little bit, but I want to be clear, that's a separate problem, separate and apart than the general fund issue that we have in the general budget. Okay, so.
And Larry, just to be very, very, very clear, the cost for EV registration almost doubled last year, actually almost tripled last year. So I think the EVs are paying their way, Senator. It's my point. now they are.
Okay. Let's go on to the next question that was submitted. Do you have any insights on the blueprint for Maryland's future? Some of the pillars, blueprint for education. What's the mood of the assembly around the blueprint? Funding, including the uses of tax.
Hey, Larry, I have to interject. My computer has told me I'm about to reboot something and restart. So lose me, I will come back in. Okay.
Okay. Well, I won't ask you to answer this question, but with the blueprint for education, we had some discussion about that were funded through this next year. One of the questions that was submitted had to do with the use of taxes from casinos and marijuana to help fund that going forward. So David or Linda, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, last year we did have a proposal for online gambling, online casino games, I should say, as a way to help fund, just funneling some of those monies to education. I think with cannabis as well. Personally, I'm not sure that's the best way to fund education through, people's addictions or, people's, in the case of gambling, people's addictions and intoxicants. But But I assume that the online gambling bill did not pass last year. I'm assuming that that's probably going to come up again this year. Again, I'm not sure that that in and of itself is enough. It may help with the blueprint. But as Senator Feldman said, the blueprint's actually funded with respect to this particular deficit. We already have funding for the blueprint. It's already been built into the budget. Senator Feldman is really the person to talk about this because it's his committee. So since he's still here, I'd really like.
Yeah, it looks like I actually have a few more minutes before I get restarted. I was with the governor at the Winter Mako conference, and the blueprint, he has already proposed one specific concrete change. It has to do with collaborative work. We have it built into the blueprint that teachers will have more time to collaborate in a multitude of ways. It's not all about teaching. It's actually learning some things going on around the country, and collaborative time is the phrase. And so there are some pretty tight timelines on that front in the blueprint. And the governor did propose that those deadlines be changed and extended and modified to give school systems more time, quite frankly, to hire more teachers. I think I said at the outset, we have a huge teacher shortage in the state, and it's won't be helped if teachers aren't even in the classroom, but they're spending a lot of time under the blueprint in collaboration mode. And so I expect the governor to roll out some other additional specific things. All those issues would come again to my committee. I haven't seen all those proposals, but again, we're talking about a $10 billion 10-year investment in K through 12 education. And like a lot of things, sometimes we get bold, and then we have to take stock of the reality of the situation budget-wise and make some modifications. And so that's definitely true on this front. And so I look forward to, some of this, the governor's going to have to lay out some specific proposals beyond this issue of collaborative time that he rolled out at Mako and he's been talking about. So.
Okay, moving on to the next question. Also relates to the budget, where somebody asked the question of, given the lack of available funds in this session, are there any bonds favoring District 15 that you hope to get funded?
We have a lot of bonds. we
have
a lot.
They have a lot of bond requests.
We have a lot of bond requests. Traditionally, we've done very well. I think this, again, we have to put this in the framework. Like Senator Feldman said, we haven't seen anything like this in 20 years. So we have to look at those bond requests, and we're not going to really get a good picture of what the budget's really going to look like until we get into March. And those decisions will be kind of made depending on how much money we actually are going to get, if we're going to get any. I don't know if Linda, if you or Delegate Foley or Senator Feldman, if you have any other comments. It's
okay.
Really again, I like to distinguish, like I said, with transportation is different. This is capital money, which is different than general fund money. And so the pie for capital projects back in District 15, you have to separate that out a little bit than the general fund deficit situation we have. It's being driven by child care subsidies, Medicaid, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a different pot of money. But it's going to be constrained, but I suspect that whatever the pie is, we'll do better than most districts. We've done that last several years, and I think that'll be the case this year as well.
Okay, the next question goes back to something you raised earlier about business. What, if any, legislative proposals are coming on to help new and existing business development? You alluded to that, and Katie, you may have some ideas on that one.
Yeah, I can make, if none of the delegates or the senator want to go ahead. The Delegate Chi, like I said, we have several bills this year that that will work to help not only attract businesses to Maryland, but keep Maryland businesses that are here afloat and competitive. So allowing them to offer better and more competitive health insurance plans, providing more tools in the toolbox for our development authorities, which will make our communities more welcoming to businesses, expanding, or not necessarily expanding, but removing the cap on TEDCO small business grants, allowing TEDCO to offer higher grant amounts. It's really, with the budget constraints, it's working within the systems that we already have. How can we attract businesses and make it easier for businesses to come to Maryland without investing millions and millions of dollars? And that's kind of, regulation is how we do that, lifting these oftentimes arduous regulations on our businesses. And again, as chair of the Business Regulation Subcommittee, this is something that the delegate will work very closely with this upcoming session.
And Mary, Senator Feldman and I have a bill together. It's called Net Operating Loss. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. But essentially what it does is move incentives around for a company so that they can take advantage of the incentives. Small startups can take advantage of those incentives when it makes sense for them. Often they're in a different kind of startup cycle. So some of their incentives when it comes to profits and losses aren't available until, a year or two later, and then sometimes they lose them. So the bill that we have kind of sets up a little bit of a trading system so that they can trade between startups depending on when they need, which would be very helpful for some of our startups, and that should really kind of help some of the startup companies. There's a couple of companies that we want to make sure different industries get the opportunity to make those to realize fully their losses and their profits at their time cycle, if that makes sense.
Going on to the next question, what should the legislature do to help working families make ends meet? And related to that is what steps are being taken to address the rising cost of rental housing and to provide affordable housing?
Well, on the second issue, affordable housing comes to my committee. Well, most of it does, and to Linda Foley's committee chaired by Mark Corman from Montgomery County. Governor did have a bill last year. This is a priority topic for him, I would say, is how do we increase supply of housing in this state? We have a shortage. We have I think a 96,000 unit housing shortage in the state of Maryland. And so if you can bulk up the inventory and the supply, that should have a tendency to drive down costs of certain kinds of housing. And so the governor last year basically did a bill that made changes to sort of how density is computed at the local level in exchange to sort of incentivize new development. And that was just last year. We'll see how that works. I think it's a little early. He's got another bill building on that, dealing with to create targets. I know we've got at least Council Member Friedson on here and some other locals, but anytime that, you talk about affordable housing and the state kind of basically getting into the world of zoning at the local level, you're going to get some pushback from locals because it's, there's a tension there between state and local government. But the governor does have a bill dealing with, coming up with targets, whether it's ADUs or other kinds of affordable housing. And so the bill has not yet been introduced, but I have been briefed that the governor will be bringing in a pretty robust.
Whoop,
Yep, I think we lost him.
just lost the senator.
There he goes. Linda, you're up. It's your committee.
Linda, you have anything to add on that one?
I was just going to add about renters and rental units. This is a topic that the governor worked on also last year, putting in a bill to establish a tenants' bill of rights that was enforced at the state level, which is really important. And along those lines, last year in the House, we did pass a good cause eviction law that would keep landlords from not renewing leases, except if there was a really good cause, like failure to pay rent, for example, but not just on a whim, so that people don't get thrown out of their rental units. I think that bill is going to come up again this session, and hopefully it'll pass the Senate and the House this coming session. That's an area on rental rights and issues for renters. So I think, I think that's going to be a busy area for us in the General Assembly for sure, because of the affordable housing crisis we have.
And Larry, I would add, in the earlier conversations about how we're going to balance the budget and coming up with $2.7 to $3 billion, and this is part of that, right? So we have to figure out how to thread the needle of figuring out how to create some economic growth for the state, balance a budget that is $2.7 billion in the hole. And a really big piece of this is like, what do we cut and what do we raise? And this question gets to what do we raise? And the reason I say that is because we are slowly coming out of a series of inflationary years that have not been good to the world, haven't been good to the United States, haven't been good to Maryland, better for us than a lot of other parts of the world, but still not good. So how do we protect people so they can stay in their rental units? How do we grow while at the same time not jacking up taxes too much based on the fact that things have already become so expensive over the last few years? That's why all of us keep saying this is going to be tough. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough, because we want to accomplish all of those goals. We need to accomplish all those goals, but some of those are in conflict with each other. So how do we do that, right?
And I think just to add to that, what Delegate Fraser-Hidalgo said about, threading that needle, we're also well aware that property assessments have skyrocketed and that property taxes across the board in Maryland have gone up by 20%, on average of 20%. We know that people are already feeling that. I guess that's the downside of, my house, appreciates in value. Yeah, it does. But then what happens is, you end up paying more property tax. So as Delegate Fraser-Hidalgo said, this is a difficult needle for us to thread, just like everything else we're facing this session. But I just want folks to understand that we are well aware that that has happened. And, speaking for myself, I'll be very mindful of that when looking at legislation, housing legislation.
It's all connected. The point is, all of this stuff is connected. It's a balloon, right? You just pull one end, the other end expands, contract one end, the other expands. So it's hard.
Okay, going on to the next question, let's take a little aside. Believe it or not, we got several questions on White's Ferry.
This is our shock phase.
There was a recent article in Montgomery Perspective, and I think they were suggesting that we're not treating this as a governmental issue, responsibility, or a public responsibility. We're treating it as a dispute between two landowners, private landowners. I don't know if that's really accurate, but do we have any updates on White's Ferry?
Sure. I understand, because I've been working on this since it closed. I understand that there are that this should be a government run piece of transportation. It should. It hasn't been. Nobody thought really, this never really came up until 4 years ago, when there was a private dispute between one person from Maryland and one person from Virginia. They could not resolve it. The Maryland person, after a year and a half or so, threw their hands up and said, "I'm out," and sold it to another person in the Commonwealth of Virginia, thinking that that somehow would be able to spur some kind of resolution and get the ferry back open. Unfortunately, it didn't, and in some ways you could argue it became even worse. So Maryland doesn't have much of a lever to pull. Every lever that Maryland can pull, I want to be very clear, every lever that Maryland can pull has been pulled to a large degree. Every lever that Montgomery County can pull has been pulled to a large degree. We're turning over every rock we can to try and figure out what other options there are. This is, at the end of the day, not a private party dispute in the state of Maryland or in Montgomery County where we have more levers. It is a dispute in another state. And so we have called the governor in the other state. We have gotten our delegation in the likes of Chris Van Hollen to work on that. The governor has worked on it as well. The simple fact of the matter is, I'm going to be very blunt, Loudoun County and the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, does not care about White's Ferry. That's just it. Say whatever you want. They don't care. We have no leverage with them. With that said, Montgomery County and the state, but I think largely Montgomery County, has been continuing to work in the background. We do have some money in the budget reserve to try to help turn this into a public transportation piece of public transportation in the future, so that we never have to do this again. It's moving. I can assure you it's moving. It's moving much more slowly because we don't have those levers and it's in another state. But it is moving, and it is moving forward. It's just slow. We'd all like it to move more quickly. We don't have those levers. It's in another state. So we're just, in some ways, we're happy that it is moving forward. I'm confident it's moving forward. I'm confident it will open. I don't have a timeline as to when it will open. But once it does get open, and we do bring some of those levers back to the state of Maryland, and we have those levers in Maryland, I'm confident that there is now, and there will be a very, very big push to ensure this ends up in the county and in the state's hands, and we never, ever have to do this again. That's the upshot of it all.
Well said. Next question we have, going back to economic things and environmental things, what's the status of legislation on data centers, including legislation relating to environmental standards? I think, David, this is something you've been working on. I don't know about the others.
Well, it is in Senator Feldman, Chair Feldman's committee. So he probably knows. I mean, I will just tell you, I think that there is a lot of concern within the General Assembly to ensure that whatever data centers come, the ratepayer don't end up paying for all the new generation it's going to be necessary. So that's something that I think that on the economic matters side, I know I've had conversations with my chair and others, and I think Lily and I are very committed in ECM to ensure that if you want to come and create a data center, that's great. But if you need to generate enormous amounts of electricity, the ratepayer shouldn't have to pay for your generation. I'm not sure how all that's going to play out. Maybe Senator Feldman knows more about it. He probably does. But that is really our big concern, is to make sure this doesn't get foisted on the backs of the ratepayer.
Well, Larry, I'll weigh in. This could be another hot topic this session. We're gonna have bills.
Right.
And I mentioned earlier that when you get past the budget, the energy issues are going to be, I think, very controversial. Here, I have to lay out kind of a framework here. So Maryland is in a bit of what we call potentially a resource adequacy crisis emerging. We're actually we're one of 13 states and a grid of states, electric grid called PJM. Right now, most people don't realize that about 40% of the power we consume in Maryland, we get from out of state. We do not generate enough energy in this state to meet our needs. And that's before we even introduced the idea of data centers, which are huge, massive consumers of energy. And so, as we think about all this, we've had some of the most aggressive greenhouse gas reduction provisions in the nation. 60% reduction by 2031 is beyond any other state in the nation. Literally, Virginia has no goals. Pennsylvania is at 25%. Even California is only at 40%. So we have a whole range of issues. I think Linda mentioned building energy performance standards. We're electrifying buildings, we're electrifying homes, we're electrifying our transportation sector with EVs and the like. So the demand for energy is going way up. At the same time, we're in the process of retiring coal-fired power plants and things of that nature. And so this 40% number was actually from 2 years ago. That number is going to creep up. And that has a huge impact on our ratepayers. You talked about middle-class, regular folks. Nobody in this state, including, pretty much nobody wants to see their energy bills double or have rolling blackouts or brownouts. And yet what we're confronting right now is this issue. And so data centers is very much a part of that, because if you want data centers here for economic growth, the digital economy, AI, all those things that would help grow the economy, they take up a lot of power and exacerbate this resource adequacy issue that I have. But ultimately, the bottom line is this disconnect between demand and supply drives up energy costs for businesses, for low, moderate income folks. And that, I think, is a huge issue facing the state, and we're going to have to deal with it this session, and my committee will be at the center of it, as well as Delegate Chi and Delegate Fraser-Hidalgo's committee and the House Economic Matters Committee. But it's a huge issue for the state. It goes to economic development, it goes to energy costs, it has everything in one fell swoop. And climate change, you know, I mean, we've tried to do a lot on offshore wind and solar, but that's intermittent. It's not, you know, as reliable, or we haven't been able to get it online as quickly as we had hoped. The issue of solar siting. Nobody wants a offshore wind on in Ocean City, so we've had problems there. Nobody wants solar arrays in the ag reserve, even in District 15, or farming communities. And so the issue of siting, and nobody, by the way, wants a nuclear power plant in their backyard either, or transmission lines. But right now, we need in-state generation quick in Maryland to solve this, and that's going to be tough. That's going to be difficult. But this session, we're going to have a lot of bills tackling that topic. So
you say there's
Larry,
a
I
lot
wanted,
of bills.
to,
You say there's going to be a lot of bills on generating additional.
right, how do we incentivize new generation, in-state new generation,
Right,
so we
exactly.
cannot have to get all our power from Pennsylvania, which is an exporter, by the way. A lot of our power comes, we want to do all this climate change, clean energy stuff, but we find ourselves in a situation where importing a lot of dirty stuff from other states because we have to, because we got to keep the lights on.
just to be clear, we spend over 15 billion with a B, not with an N, but with a B, billion. We spend over $15 billion a year buying electricity from other states, and a majority of that electricity is dirty electricity. It's not renewable. So I think that, you know, Senator Feldman mentioned something too on the solar siting thing. That's going to be a really big issue, because one of the reasons, not the only reason, this is very complicated, but one of the reasons that we are where we are and we are behind in reaching our goals and behind in production is because of solar siting. It's the wind issue as well, but when everybody says no and everybody says no, but really a bunch of people say yes and they want it, but then they don't want it in their backyard, it starts, after years of this, it starts to become a very big problem. And that's not the only reason, but that is a significant contributing factor, is that counties and jurisdiction all across the state, not just the ag reserve, but all across the state, including the ag reserve, say yes and they say no at the same time. And when they say no, things get delayed, and then it adds costs, and then a project ends up costing, I mean, if people don't know, the average cost in the United States to develop a solar system is almost 30% higher than it is like in a country like Australia. So one of those reasons, not the only, but one of those reasons is because nobody wants it. Everybody wants clean electricity and clean air, but not everybody wants to see wind turbines. Not everybody wants solar panels on the roof of their home, or not everybody can afford to, or they don't want to see a solar array. And so that's one of the reasons why we're kind of getting into this predicament.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on.
Can I mention another issue with respect to this? And that is, Senator Feldman talked about power generation. So I know that we all, I think, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think that there's a lot of support in District 15 for shutting down the Dickerson incinerator in Dickerson, and transitioning away from that. And I do favor that as an environmentalist. But among other issues, and there are a lot of issues around that, one of them is, if you're going to shut down a place like Dickerson, it doesn't generate that much power. But every time we shut down an incineration plant or a coal plant, we have to figure out ways to get new energy to replace that. And we want that to come from clean energy. And just to put a fine point on what Delegate Fraser-Hidalgo said, and that means we are going to have to do things like, put solar arrays around the state. That doesn't mean we have to go crazy with it, but it does mean that we have to think very strategically about what we do there. The other thing I do want to mention is the renewable portfolio standard, which gives tax credits to incineration. In the state of Maryland, we're the only ones that do that at the level that we do it. We need to reform that, because we need to recapture some of that money back and incentivize cleaner energy by doing that. So I just wanted to add those points.
And Larry, on Linda's, I just do need to add, because this again will be in my committee, but we actually have a bill from the Senate President this term. This is quite unprecedented, that will actually remove the subsidy for the waste energy incineration. So I should be clear, though, removing the subsidy doesn't mean it's going to close. People sort of tend to think that if you remove the subsidy, that particular plant is actually owned by Montgomery County. And Montgomery County actually just extended the contract on that facility by 5 years. And so I just want to make the point that, and it's actually ratepayer money. So when we talk about subsidies or tax, this isn't general fund tax subsidy for, this is, ratepayers of Maryland are subsidizing that facility, which many people don't think is clean energy, but is being subsidized. But there is a bill by the Senate president this session to remove that from what they call Tier 1 status and the state subsidy that we're talking about within the renewable portfolio state. Makes it very likely.
I will say that Dickerson was a question about 3 down the road, so you already answered one that's coming.
Good.
Switching gears, we have a question about the aid in dying bill didn't pass. Do you see anything this year? And do you see anything happening this year on that bill?
Well, maybe. One of the things in the Senate we're running into right now is we're losing some senators. The last time we actually had a vote on the Senate floor, it was a 43-43 tie vote. And the 47th senator, who could have broke the tie, sat in his chair and did not vote. He's no longer in the Senate, but that's what happened the last time we got it to the full Senate. This time, this will go to Will Smith and Jeff Waldstreicher's committee from Montgomery County. They're the chair and the vice chair. And I think it has a decent shot, although I will say, as recently as yesterday, we have yet another new senator. We have multiple new senators, one replacing the new Congressman Sarah Elfreth, a new senator from Anne Arundel, won in a 10-9 Central Committee vote. Maybe we'll get back to the special elections issue, but that new senator is going to go to the Judicial Proceedings Committee, of which this is being heard. And so in the Senate, where you only have 11 people, and this particular issue has tended to come down to 1 or 2 votes, and I happen to know where this particular new senator who hasn't yet been sworn in comes down on this issue. It's not on the pro side. So I have to just say that this will be tight, very tight. I think it can pass, but if history is any indication, it could come down to 1 or 2 votes, and it may depend on, and in fact, tomorrow we're going to be losing another senator. One of our other senators is going to be, looks like, going to be the next county executive of Baltimore County, and she'll have a replacement. And we've had several others that are, so these replacements could dictate the outcome of that bill, at least in the Senate. I can't speak obviously for the House.
We also have a couple questions relating to voting. There's one, do you see anything for ranked choice voting this session? And somewhat related to that, the proposed opt-in ID for people with disabilities?
I'm not sure those two are related, Larry, but
Well, maybe not.
yeah,
I'm
I'm
stretching
not
here,
sure. I
sorry.
saw that question. I think that that might have to do with, I don't know, the opt-in for people with disabilities might have to do with identifying people with disabilities in transactions with the state, I think.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but
I'm not sure either.
Well, I
then.
think
Okay.
I always say again, election law comes to my committee. I think Senator Kagan may have a ranked choice voting bill. I haven't done a whip count. I don't know where people on my committee come down, but I think there will be a bill. I think Delegate Chi, Katie may want to speak. I think there was another question in election dealing with, allowing more people to vote in primaries and I think this has been, Lily has championed this issue. Katie, maybe you want to speak to that bill because that's sort of in the same lane.
Absolutely, yes. The delegate will be reintroducing a bill this year that would simply align the voter affiliation deadline with the voter registration deadline. So allowing unaffiliated voters to affiliate with a party up to the voter registration deadline during early voting. A lot of times, especially immigrants and new voters to our state don't realize that if you're unaffiliated, you can't vote in our primary elections. So this would just simply allow and expand who can vote in our primary elections, because in a state like Maryland, our primaries really do kind of decide most of our elections. And, we're seeing this past during the 2024 election, we saw a really large surge in unaffiliated voters, especially in our younger voters. So this is simply keeping Maryland up with our times and making sure that we are providing the most representation that we can.
Hey, and Larry, since Linda's here, I think since we're just talking election stuff, could you just maybe for the audience, I think it would be important to just explain precisely what the special elections bill, which we did pass in the Senate last year, stalled in the House, but I think things could change this year. I think it'd be good just to maybe articulate at least what it does.
Sure. So in Maryland, unlike I think virtually every other state, we have no special elections when it comes to filling vacancies in our General Assembly, and both the Senate and the House. And it was referenced earlier that there was a vote of 10-9 in the Anne Arundel Central Committee to replace a senator. So you essentially had 19 people decide that this person that the person would become a senator. This special elections bill is a bill that I put in now. This is the third year, I think, that I have sponsored the bill. Before that, it was sponsored by Delegate David Moon, who's now the majority leader in the House. Nevertheless, we have had trouble getting this passed in the House. And what it would do is we have a 4-year term in the General Assembly. And if a vacancy occurs in the General Assembly, the Central Committee of the party of the retiring member picks the replacement, essentially makes a recommendation to the governor makes an appointment for that person to serve the remainder of the term. And I got my seat that way. So just to be honest about it, but we have had several instances because we had a new governor where people were appointed at the very beginning of the term in the first year of a 4-year term and have never faced the voters. So what this bill does is it says that if you are appointed, it maintains the appointment procedure, but it says that if you are appointed to fill a legislative vacancy, then you must stand for election in the first 2 years of a term. You must stand for election in the presidential election year, which would be declared a special election for those seats. You would have to stand for election in the presidential election year. So at least those appointments that occur early in the term would have some voter input. As Senator Feldman said, this passed the Senate last year. The Senate president was very supportive of this bill. It did not pass the House. I'm hopeful it might be different this year because there has been some indication from the leadership of the Ways and Means Committee that they are looking more favorable on the bill. And so hopefully we can get this passed and start, having this kind of reform. Virginia has a special election every time there is a vacancy in the legislature. You compare that to Maryland, where we never have special elections to fill legislative vacancies, and it's a pretty stark difference. So that in a nutshell is what that bill does.
And Larry, if I may add one piece to that, because I think it's important. What Delegate Foley said about 19 people making the decision, it's really important for people to understand, of those 19 people that have just appointed that senator, of those 19 people, almost probably, I don't know the exact number, it's probably 16 or 17 of them, they don't even live in the district in which they are appointing somebody to fill out the term. I mean, they don't even live in that district. And in full disclosure, I too was appointed, but I was appointed, as was Linda, in the 4th year of a 4-year term. At the very, very end of a cycle, both of us ran smack dab right into an election cycle. So for somebody that's never run before to all of a sudden become a delegate or a senator that has never knocked on a door, and they are getting a 4 or 3-year term, and they're being appointed or essentially elected by a vast majority of that committee that doesn't even live in the district.
Okay, moving on, then the next question that was pre-submitted has to do with criminal justice reforms, police or criminal justice reforms. Do you see anything moving forward in this session on that broad issue?
We have a former Montgomery County police officer here, and Delegate Dave Fraser-Hidalgo, so that would be a good one for him to.
Well, we don't have Kathleen Dumais here anymore, but
right.
So, look, we've done a lot on criminal justice reform, or since I've been in the General Assembly, a lot on criminal justice reform. There may be something coming this session. There were a couple pieces last session, some passed, some didn't pass. But I will say, going back, harkening back to the earlier part of this town hall tonight, a vast majority of the energy is going to be spent on balancing the budget and a lot of
Right.
other things. We've done an incredible amount on criminal justice reform. So I'm sure there's going to be some movement. I don't anticipate it being really substantive or big, but
Okay,
you never know. You never know.
Larry, I would add though, when you talk about local law enforcement, generally, if the new president-elect does what he says he's talking about in terms of immigration, deportation, the question of the role of local law enforcement in that world will come up. And I think there are some bills being drafted to, address that issue. Again, the new administration and what they plan to do has got, a lot of implications for a state like Maryland. And I would just put that out there. There is an interplay there between what he's been talking about in terms of mass deportation on the immigration front and, the resources of local law enforcement in a place like Montgomery County. So keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And the only other thing I would add is I know in the Women's Caucus, we are taking a hard look at several issues around incarceration of women in our state, including a pre-release center and where that's located and how we treat women coming out of the prison system. That may be a focus of people who are already in the prison system and have been incarcerated, and how we're treating them in addition to the immigrant rights issue, as Brian pointed out.
And this, just like everything else, that Senator Feldman often makes this comment. I'm surprised it hasn't come up yet tonight, but it just did in a way, and that is, all the action is on the state level, with the feds not being able to really get things together, or not really being able to pass much, and it just kind of being a kind of mess down there. Now it's going to be even more so. So when it comes to this particular issue, I think that both Senator Feldman and Delegate Foley are right. There's going to be a lot of immigration type issues, like what's going to happen. And again, all the action, whether it's economic or climate change or criminal justice, is all going to be on all the actions on the state level.
Although I
Right,
would,
Senator?
if I could just say though, all the talk about the new administration is real. However, this tight margin of 3 or 4 seats gives me some hope, because you saw it play out. We were it was unclear if we were going to get this federal money for the Key Bridge rebuild, but we managed to do it because there's no wiggle room, man, up on the House of Representatives. So I think to some extent, because it's such a tight number, some of the worst fears may not ultimately be realized when it comes to all these issues, but that's just kind of an observation based on the whole Key Bridge issue, which I thought was going to be a lost cause there for a while, but.
Okay, the next question, switching gears back, probably should have asked this one earlier, but Brian, you alluded earlier to the difference between transportation funding and the general budget deficit. What are we doing about addressing the issue of transportation?
One thing that, Governor Hogan, respectfully blew a hole in that transportation trust fund. He took victory laps when he reduced tolls on our toll roads. That cost the state, our transportation trust fund, that one act, $500 million, right? And so, and again, talk about lowering taxes, but we have this hole, and then it's challenging. Now, Dave, I skirted over the EV issue, but the fact is, we're super ambitious on electric vehicles. We adopted the Advanced Clean Cars California model, which is going to take us to 100% EVs like 2035 potentially in this state. And they don't pay a gas tax, right? I mean, I get the vehicle registration fee, but the gas tax is the main primary source of the transportation trust fund. So that's one area moving forward. And we're not alone. Every state in the nation is confronting sort of the same set issues. But here are the numbers. We will probably need to find $450 million of new transportation money in some way, shape, or form just to do no harm. I'm not talking additional projects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we want to do all that, then it's going to be a bigger number. But we have a unique, Maryland's kind of an odd system. The state has total responsibility over the DC Metro system,
Uh-oh.
is, you know,
Okay.
okay, I don't know, somebody else. State, we handled both mass transit systems. These are state responsibilities. Most states assign it more of on a regional basis, whether it's a regional transportation authority or the region takes care of the transportation needs of each region. We are kind of an outlier in the nation. And I think I serve on the Metro Washington Council of Governments Board of Director COG, and there continues to be more conversation about some kind of regional funding on a lot of this stuff, not just everything has to come from Annapolis. And so this could put some more pressure on some of our counties. But you know, that may be some way out of the state transportation trust fund crisis. But that's kind of just and there's ways around that. I mean, our gas tax is in California or something like that, so we can't really go to that well. But I do think, you know, whether it's transportation, miles traveled, I mean, Dave can talk about that. The other models for the EV use as we continue to expand the EV fleet, we got to move away from gas taxes being the sole source of our transportation trust fund.
Well, Brian, you had said something earlier about there being a deficit. Is there something this year that we're going to need to make up, or are we talking more along the lines of just general trust fund?
Are you talking about transportation or are we talking
Yeah,
general?
transportation.
Well, I think right now, like for example, there's a lot of cuts happening at MDOT. WMATA DC Metro system announced a round of cuts. So a lot of it's becoming more efficient. But we can't build new projects. Like, for example, and that I'll come back to the federal administration. Like this administration is not big on mass transit, and yet they're a federal partner. So if we don't get money from the feds on some of these bigger, longer term projects, there's a project in Baltimore, the Red Line. We need we need support to keep our DC Metro system. And this, by the way, goes back to economic growth. If you can't get from point A to point B, good luck attracting Fortune 500 companies to this state or growing the economy. And so this is vital to the future of our state economically. So yes, I think right now we probably need about $400 million to do no harm, if you will. But I hope we could get more ambitious and do some projects, whether it's Beltway or more mass transit or other kinds of, things of that nature. I have a little frog in my throat, so I'm going to yield back to you, Larry.
Okay. That brings us to the end of the submitted questions. Let me try to go through some that were in the question and answer. One is, what will this group's position be, this group, you guys, on allowing grocery stores to sell liquor? Is that a state issue
Yes.
or a county issue?
Yeah,
State issue.
State issue.
Okay.
I will say that a big concern, a very large concern for me is that when you do that, the small mom and pop beer and wine stores, they go. I mean, there's one in Lehman Farm, not far from me. There's a giant around the corner. There's a state liquor store, and on the other side, in that same strip, there is a mom and pop wine and beer store. And that my mom and pop store will be gone. 6 months or a year, they'll be gone.
And I will say, you know, this and a Delegate Fraser-Hidalgo's concern is definitely very real. So Delegate She did sponsor a similar piece of legislation that would allow beer and wine in grocery stores back in the early 2020 and 2021 sessions. But with the provision that it had to be a grocery store in a food desert. A grocery store had to relocate in a food desert. So I think, I think it's going to be tough to balance the needs, the wants of the consumer and the needs of our businesses. And as you know, Delegate She is very sensitive to ensuring our small business community is successful. But I think there's also a way to find a balance between the two, maybe. And I think it's also important to note there'll be no new licenses added to this the way the bill is written now. There's no new licenses being added. So in order for a grocery store to get a license, they can't just start selling beer and wine. They have to take a license or buy a license from someone else. And I think that's a really important aspect of that legislation.
Okay.
I agree with Delegate Chief's position as articulated by Katie, in the sense that I think, you know, as a principle, I'm in favor of it, but I do think that we need to be cognizant, as Delegate Fraser-Hidalgo said, of the impact on our small businesses, our you know, mom and pop operations, and we need to make sure that we do it in a way that they aren't, you know, put out of business. I also want to be careful that we don't start putting beer and wine in Dollar General stores, for example. We need to be very picky about which, as Katie said, we need to be picky about which grocery stores we allow these sales to be held in.
One of the questions on the Q&A, the Renew Act was shelved early last year during the legislative session. I think somebody mentioned that earlier. Can somebody comment on whether that's going to come up this year? What's going to happen this year?
Sure, I've mentioned it in my opening. That's my
Yeah.
bill. That's my priority bill. It creates about $1 billion a year for the next 9 years. So that's $9 billion. I think that there's an idea in the past that it was an interesting concept, but not quite ready. Now New York has passed it. Another state slips my mind. I think it's maybe Vermont, New York.
Vermont, it's Vermont.
Vermont and New York have both done it now, so we wouldn't be the first. And given that we are in such a big budget hole, I think there's a new thought, like, you know, it's going to take a couple of years to get that money, maybe more with lawsuits involved, but the sooner we get it started, the sooner we get the money that we deserve, and the sooner that Maryland taxpayers and ratepayers don't have to pay as much for the results of climate change than they have in the past. So I've got a renewed sense of hope for my bill this year than I haven't had in the past.
Well, that's another bill that would come in the Senate to my committee, but you know, I think it has a decent shot. The one issue that came up in the hearing last year, you know, is what prevents the target of the bill from just not passing on those $1 billion in cost to the consumer. In other words, if you're sitting in Maryland as a consumer, are you ultimately the one paying the price? So that we've gone through this with some other issues in the past about protections to make sure that the end user is just not a pass on. And so that, I think, is something we'll have to address, I think, in order to get it over the hurdle there. But
Another question has to do with the budget outlook for the University of Maryland and the university system. I think somebody's afraid that they may take a hit. Do we have any thoughts on that?
well, I met with the University System Maryland representatives maybe 2 weeks ago, all 12 institutions. Yes, they're very concerned, and I think it's very likely I think have been told by the governor that they may be facing 5% across the board cuts. And so those are big numbers. I took my whole committee on a site visit to College Park, and that's all the folks at College Park, including President Pines, wanted to talk about, which was, you know, potential 5% cuts across the board. So yes, I think there's going to be some pain there. They're going to be, you know, again, everything's on the table, and I don't think the institutions of higher learning are going to be exempt here.
Another question about small modular reactors. I guess that's nuclear reactors. Is there any activity on that?
Well, back to new generation of energy. Nuclear power is making a political comeback in the country. Many of you probably read 3 Mile Island is reopening. Linda and
Yes.
I are from Pittsburgh area, Pennsylvania, and you know the idea that 3 Mile Island would be reopening is, you know, crazy. But why? Because they want to they're trying to get Microsoft data center down there and feed power from the nuclear power plant. So nuclear. Most people in Maryland do not realize that 40% of our power in Maryland comes from nuclear power. We have a nuclear power plant at Calvert Cliffs. I don't know how many times will people say, I'm not for nuclear, and they have no idea that we're getting 40% plus in Maryland from Calvert Cliffs. But there's no greenhouse gas emissions when we talk about clean energy. So many states this year moved forward with incentives to create new nuclear. And SMRs, small modular reactors, is a new technology, not the big 3 Mile Island projects, but smaller can come online quicker, arguably clean. And so when you think about the solutions on climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, I think almost certainly nuclear is going to be part of it. And you're going to see bills this session from leadership to incentivize the development of new nuclear, and SMRs are part of that.
I'm looking at some of the questions in the Q&A. A lot of them we've already talked about, and some of them are somewhat specific. So let's see if we have one or two people who want to. We got about 4 minutes left before closing. Is there anybody in the audience, Andrew, that you see that might have a question to ask?
Yes, I see two hands raised. If you'd like me to unmute one of the two of them, Ann Davies and Shari Dexter.
Sure,
Sherry
go
Dexter.
ahead.
Sure,
But please
I
ask
saw.
a question fairly quickly because we're running out of time.
I just allowed Ann Davies. I saw her hand first. I just allowed her to speak. So if you unmute yourself, you can
Here
ask
she
your
goes.
question.
Thank you. I think I'm unmuted.
Yes.
My question had to do with solar energy because I live in Montgomery County in the Ag Reserve, and we support solar energy, but we spent a long time in negotiations between people like Countryside Alliance and Sugarloaf Citizens Association and a number of farmer groups negotiating with solar advocates and reached an agreement that up to 2 megawatts of solar farm could be put in the ag reserve as long as it was not on prime soils. So please don't say that the people in the ag reserve don't want solar energy. We do, but with limitations. And my question really was, would you all please support us if the state, if the governor, if the legislature wants to impose a 5 megawatt, never mind where we put it, law, it would not be good for us. It would defy our own county laws that we worked through very hard. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, we're looking for questions. The next person, Andrew, please ask a question.
Yes, Sherry Dexter. I just.
Yeah,
Sherry?
thank you so much. I had a comment earlier, but I'll put it in the form of a question. I guess this is like Jeopardy. But I just wanted to get the take on really if somebody could talk more about what's going to happen with Medicaid, Medicare. I mean, these are big things that the administration has talked about, big cuts coming. Want to know how that's going to impact because there's a lot of families that are already facing cuts due to regulations in the Medicaid area. But we're really worried about what the impact is going to be even more when things come down from the federal government. So if you
Does
could.
anybody have any comments on that? Any thoughts on that?
All that, and Larry, we didn't, I have, before I will try to get there, but Ann Davies did pose a question to us.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You know, we didn't, and just so you know, with the group, the D15 team, we had a very constructive meeting last week with the Countryside Alliance, Caroline Taylor and her team. And I thought it was really productive. And I think, you know, there was general meeting of the minds on a lot of these issues. So I just want to make it clear that the points you make are legitimate, reasonable. We're hearing you. We had a good meeting last week, including a lot of farmers. So I'll just say, as far as I think that's one we're looking to see what the governor puts on the table next week. I mean, that's really in his bailiwick. And so on the 15th, we'll know literally next Wednesday, what's the kind of opening salvo from the governor on Medicaid, Medicare, that kind of thing, healthcare more broadly.
One
Okay,
thing
so
on the
go
Medicare,
ahead.
Medicare is a federal program. We deal more with Medicaid on the state level. But one of the things we are doing, we are looking at in this session is again to try to keep down the cost of prescription drugs, which does have an effect on Medicare spending, and Medicaid spending. So I just wanted to add that. Delegate Collison will have another bill to try to rein in the cost of prescription drugs.
Okay, well, that brings us close to our ending time. So we're going to ask each legislator to spend a couple of minutes with a closing discussion, and then Kathy's going to make some closing remarks. Brian, do you want to go first?
Look, I don't, I think we covered, thank you again for the invite. I thought this was good. Look, most of my time this session is going to be chairing that committee with all that broad jurisdiction. You could see even all the issues we talked about. Most of the issues that came up today are going to come to my committee in the Senate. But I keep an eye on the energy policy stuff because that I think is, under the radar a little bit. The budget's number one, energy, the blueprint, those are going to be the big affordable housing. Those are going to be the big ones, and most of those issues will be in my committee. So thank you, Larry and Kathy, for inviting us again.
David?
Sure. I mean, I don't know that there's much to add. I think Senator Feldman did a great job of saying it. These are the big issues that are going to come, and it's hard for us to talk about what's going to happen because none of us have a crystal ball. We know these things are coming. We don't know how they're going to play out. So buckle up, and we'll keep talking. Thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you very much, Larry. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody, for coming, putting this on, everything. Thank you.
Linda, do you have any closing comments?
Just to say what my colleagues have said, which is, thank you very much for your time tonight and for, for letting us know what your thoughts are and, asking questions. This helps us become better legislators. I also want to thank the legislative team, Dave, Lily, and Brian, all of whom it's really a privilege, as we've said, to work together. Not all teams in Annapolis do this. I think I think I can say that District 15 is fortunate in that we do have such a good relationship, and I think we are able to get a lot of things done for the district. Please reach out to us. We do like to hear from you. I put my email address in the chat. Encourage my colleagues to do the same, so that if you need an issue, our session starts on Wednesday, and we're there for you. We're representing District 15. Thanks again. Thanks for everything you do. Thanks, Larry. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Lisa. Everybody, Andrew, everybody who works so hard here in District 15. We are truly fortunate to have such an active and engaged caucus in our district. So thank you.
One thing on what you said, I think Kathy is going to post everybody's contact information in the chat for after this. So, yes, we want to do that. Katie, do you have anything you'd like to close with on behalf of Lily?
Absolutely. And I think, the senator and other delegates really hit the nail on the head that it's going to be a tough session because of the budget, but there's still so many other issues affecting our state, such as the environment, healthcare, all of these other things. So really just figuring out how we can balance all of that is going to be really key during this session. And echoing what Delegate Foley said, please do not hesitate to reach out to our offices. There's a lot of information discussed tonight, so please don't hesitate to reach out if you guys have any questions about the delegates' bills or if we can provide any assistance.
Thank you very much. So Kathy, we're about 2 minutes early, but maybe you can take it from here.
Sounds good. Thank you to our D15 state legislators, our moderator, Larry Arch, and all who attended. If you want to get involved with our D15 caucus activities, contact me at Catherine, Katherine.Dierkowski@gmail.com, or fill out our volunteer form at our website, d15democrats.org. You can learn more about our Montgomery County Democratic Party activities by subscribing to the Montgomery County Party newsletter at mcdcc.org/newsletter. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a good session.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.